David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We have to sort of accept something that for a lot of Americans and people who live in the United States may be sort of difficult to accept. I know there's people in the audience that this will be a difficult realization to come to. The United States is rapidly losing superpower status over what has been a disgustingly incompetent response to the virus pandemic. Back when Donald Trump was first elected president, we had sort of this conversation where we said, who now becomes the leader of the free world? And again, the leader of the free world, it's not a formal designation. It's just a colloquial term. It dates back to the Cold War, and it more or less means who is the head statesman of Western democratic nations. And it's basically been the president of the United States de facto for a long time. But increasingly under Donald Trump, and we discussed this 3 years ago, the leader of the free world has increasingly been German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And again, it's not a literal designation, it's not a formal title, it's a colloquialism. The new discussion is no longer who is the leader of the free world. It's not Donald Trump, that's clear. It's more about the U.S. is rapidly losing superpower status over our inability to properly deal with coronavirus, and our embarrassing moral failings, which are highlighted every single day by Donald Trump's Gong Show press briefings. We'll talk about that later, where he brags about ratings and, brings up religious nuts to speak and praise him, rather than presenting the sort of sober, fact-based information that is being done not just by many of our own governors, but if you look around the world, you see Germany, you see France, you see Canada, and many others. Their leaders are actually doing serious informative press conferences for their populations. The U.S. is losing influence. Trump was slow. Trump was unprepared. Trump was focused on phrases like Chinese virus and bragging about how soon we're going to have 0 cases. We now have around 200,000, close to 200,000. Governors can't get the supplies that they need. They're not coming to us for help, meaning other countries. We don't appear to know what we're doing. So why would anyone come to us? Now, Trump insists everyone's coming to us. It's not true. And this perception that you must have American competence if you want to properly deal with a problem around the world, that was a reality for a long time. During a crisis, other countries would say, we've got to be involved with the U.S. Let's get help from the U.S. Let's get guidance. That is fading very quickly in the era of coronavirus. Now, we've already talked about this in terms of climate change. The world no longer comes to the U.S. and often doesn't even involve the U.S. when we're dealing with climate change under Donald Trump. They ignore us. Trump bailed on the Paris climate accords. Trump has loosened emissions law. The EPA has now suspended pollution law. We'll get to that later. Regulations rather than law. And Trump has said climate change is a hoax created by the Chinese. So we're out, right? We are not a superpower when it comes to climate change anymore. Now, on the virus, the decline of the U.S. as a superpower is very, very clear. China is sending ventilators and teams to Italy. They're sending masks to Belgium. Germany has had a plan that has held down the death rate dramatically. Germany was early on testing when it comes to European countries. South Korea mitigated the curve the most powerfully. Remember, South Korea and the U.S. had their first cases on the same day. A lot of people believe South Korea had a situation way earlier. No, it was the same day. They immediately developed a test. They established fever clinics. They established proactive family quarantine and isolation. We didn't. We're behind the curve. We're the ones who need help from other countries. The U.S. is not the beacon that the rest of the world is trying to emulate on foreign policy. We are not the beacon that the world wants to emulate on dealing with climate change. And we are certainly not the beacon that the world wants to emulate on coronavirus. The only emulators of the U.S. lately are terrible. The nationalist Indian prime minister, Kim Jong-un, Mohammed bin Salman, Erdogan, right? The people now emulating the U.S. and our leader are not the democratic Western leaders that we are accustomed to, because they can't look to Trump. They would fail if they mirrored Donald Trump's leadership or lack thereof. The ones that do are the cartoonish morons, right? The Brazilian president who insists, like Trump, that the media is lying to them about the virus or whatever the case may be. We're quickly becoming a joke, and it's heartbreaking. I take no pleasure on this. I know people on the right keep contacting me saying, David, you're gleeful at the death toll. You're gleeful at the stock market crash. No. It's quite the opposite. It's heartbreaking, and the rapidly climbing death toll is part of that heartbreak. We may quickly have a situation in about 3 to 4 months where the rest of the world starts lifting travel bans, but they have to keep the U.S. banned because we have no idea what we're doing, or at least Donald Trump doesn't. Mexico might all of a sudden say, hey, we want to pay for a wall. I'm kidding, right? But in the literal sense, I'm kidding. We should be out there leading the fight against the virus rather than falling further and further behind with a clueless clown doing daily press briefings where he attacks journalists, self-congratulates, and does all the things that he's been doing. Trump is failing because we don't have the tools that are right for the job. We have a president who looks to bomb things, but you can't bomb the coronavirus. We have a president who thinks of drones. You can't drone the coronavirus. You can't bribe anybody. People need to stay home. We need to proactively secure medical equipment. Trump didn't. We needed to develop a test early. Trump didn't. We have to use the media to get the danger of the virus out, not to try to hide the danger of the virus, which Donald Trump did. Crises are Trump's kryptonite, and this is a big one. And it's a sad reality for the United States. We're counting on, we're relying on our governors to get us out of this. Some of them are doing a good job, some are not. And we'll see where that goes. Remember that in times of vulnerability, in times of chaos, in times of strife, you've got to be really careful about people who are looking to take advantage of the situation. And we've already pointed out a lot of the individual grifters selling bogus virus cures, Jim Baker, Alex Jones. We've talked about those claiming to pray away the coronavirus for money, Kenneth Copeland, a televangelist. We've talked about all of that. But today I want to talk to you about a big grift. Those are small grifts. I want to tell you about the big grift right now. And grift doesn't even cover it. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is suspending the enforcement of environmental rules over the coronavirus. The EPA told companies they will not have to meet environmental standards during the coronavirus pandemic. There's no end date on that policy, indefinitely. But the one thing is they have to be able to justify not meeting the environmental rules and regulations on the basis of the virus, which is very, very easy to do. So for now, there's no penalty for non-compliance with routine monitoring and routine reporting obligations. So this means that while things are crazy with the virus, companies can effectively pollute the air, pollute water, do all the things that we later learn leads to increased cancer rates and accelerating climate change and all of that stuff. The only rule is you have to be able to plausibly justify it because of the virus. Now, of course, a beautiful loophole is right there. As long as you can say it's because of the virus, you're okay. And here's the incredible beauty of it. You can say, well, we don't know how much we've been polluting because we've not been able to monitor the pollution because of the virus. Now, I'm not saying it's not true to a degree that if you're talking about social distancing, work from home, all this stuff, it's plausible it would affect a company's ability to monitor pollution and the other, so on and so forth. But the question is, why is the EPA loudly saying this? Like, okay, imagine the EPA realizes, hey, you know what? Some companies aren't going to be able to monitor. We aren't going to be able to successfully monitor the companies because the EPA itself is socially distancing or whatever. But you don't have to tell everybody, right? Don't tell them, because when you tell them, you're literally saying, go pollute, do whatever it takes to make as much money as possible right now. The reason why, sadly, is that industry has successfully lobbied the EPA. The oil industry has been lobbying the EPA to say, suspend the rules, announce a suspension of the rules. The Hill reports that the American Petroleum Institute, big oil lobby, asked that rules be suspended, which require repairing leaky equipment and monitoring for air pollution and seepage into nearby water. It's another set of grifters, a big grift, exploiting coronavirus for their gain. Fortunes are being made because of coronavirus. Understand that, and many more will be made. You can now pollute, you won't get in trouble. So why the hell not? It's disaster politics 101. It becomes a cash grab. Get your friends contracts. Trump now having the government buy masks from the MyPillow lunatic who's a Trump sycophant. I'll tell you about that later. Do a bailout, but 2/3 of the bailout goes to a few corporations and not to people. Cancel environmental rules and penalties. Open the floodgates for your friends in industry to start polluting and grabbing cash. Horrible, horrible stuff. Predictable. Disaster politics 101. April 9th, okay, next Thursday, we are going to do a huge membership drive. This is going to be a one-day membership drive, okay? We're having some issues as a result of the virus. YouTube revenue's down about 35-40% because so many advertisers have pulled out. Two big advertisers of ours are either canceling or postponing ad campaigns. A lot of people are tightening the belt and canceling memberships, which I understand. So next Thursday, April 9th, we're going to do a one-day membership drive to try to sort of kickstart things. It'll be a huge discount. Get notified about it by getting on our mailing list at davidpakman.com. Really easy. More information about that coming later in the week. Thursday, April 9th, David Pakman Show membership drive. In the meantime, make sure you're following me on Twitter. Let me know what you're doing to stay busy during the quarantine at @dpakman on Twitter.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Edith Buxton and Matthew Andreessen. Edith and Matthew, thank you for your support. Grabbing a membership at joinpakman.com. Also want to say thanks to Mark Hufteling, who has been a member for 5 years, just under 5 years, and is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Grab a membership today at joinpakman.com or get on our mailing list on my website, and you'll be notified on April 9th of a huge membership special. Over the last 48 hours, we have seen an incredible shift where Donald Trump has signaled that if only 200,000 people die of coronavirus in the United States, that would be considered a very good job. We are seeing such a goalpost move here that it might actually trick his followers because of how drastically the goalposts are being moved. I want to remind you, we have an incompetent, failed response to the virus. This has resulted in Trump's last tool, so to speak, which is gaslighting his followers so that they will hopefully forget that just a few weeks ago, Trump was talking about we've got 15 cases and that number will soon be 0. Other countries were acting like adults. They were preparing for the pandemic. Here is Trump Sunday saying, you know, if we end up with no more than 200,000 people dying, not cases, deaths, okay, that would be a very good job. And Trump sort of cleverly mentioning, you know, one estimate said 2.2 million might die. If we can keep it to 200,000 deaths, that would be a big, very good job that we did.
So you're talking about 2.2 million deaths, 2.2 million people from this. And so if we could hold that down, as we're saying, to 100,000, it's a horrible number. Maybe even less, but to 100,000. So we have between 100 and 200,000. We all together have done a very good job.
So recall that Trump tweeted on March 9th that this is nothing compared to the flu because the flu might kill 27,000 to 70,000 people, saying, quote, so last year, 37,000 Americans died from the common flu. It averages 27 to 70,000 per year. Nothing is shut down. Life and the economy go on. At this moment, there are 546 confirmed cases of coronavirus with 22 deaths. Think about that. Now, at the time, 22 deaths. Now, 3,000 and climbing in the United States. And the same Trump who said this isn't as bad as the flu, sometimes up to 70,000 die because of the flu each year, rarely, but sometimes, he's now saying if we stay below 200,000 deaths, not cases, we will have done a good job. Remember, here was Trump saying we have 15 cases and it will soon be 0.
We've done really an extraordinary job when you look at a country this size with so many people pouring in. We're the number one in the world for people coming into a country by far. And we have a total of 15 cases. And again, when you have 15 people and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to 0, that's a pretty good job we've done.
And now, if we don't lose more than 200,000 people, it means Trump did a very good job. This is a hell of a lot of deaths for something that 5 weeks ago was nothing and just the latest Democratic hoax. So it's really, really important that we don't take our eye off the ball. This is a pandemic. This is a tragedy. At some point, we will get past it. We will have some death toll. The latest estimates are about 83,000 for this wave. We could then have a second wave in the fall and another wave in 2021. We could get to 200,000 by the time it's all said and done. We don't know yet. But at some point, it's going to be done. We can't forget the incompetence and the lying and the deception and say, hey, we made it. Those of us that do make it, and hopefully as many of us as possible will be in that group, we have to remember that we've been led by one of the worst responses in the world to the virus. Maybe Iran did worse. I don't know. China lied a lot, sure. But look at how quickly South Korea developed and deployed a test. They had their first case on the same day we did. South Korea has 150 deaths total, not in one day, total. We have hundreds dying every day. It appears it will soon be thousands dying per day. We need to ensure that there is a consequence for Trump. And now this framing that he's doing of, listen, it's a big win if we keep the death toll to 200,000. He previously said, we have a few cases, it will soon be none. We now are having potentially hundreds of thousands of deaths. We can't let him get away with it. His followers are going to. We can't. Enough of us have to remember that we need a change in November of 2020 so that he cannot get away with this. There are medical components here. There are social, cultural components here, economic. There are so many considerations. But we've been failed by the Trump administration, and there has to be a consequence for that. I don't know if there will be, but I hope there is. Hey, so this is weird. It seems that Donald Trump doesn't understand the concept of per capita. For the last 10 days or so, Trump keeps bragging about how much the U.S. is testing for the virus. And every time he does, he's ignoring the concept of per capita. Or at least we thought he was ignoring the concept of per capita because it wasn't politically convenient. But based on yesterday's press conference, I'm increasingly thinking Trump doesn't understand what per capita means. Per capita, of course, is when you adjust numbers for the size of a population. So if I say to you, the United States and Colombia both gave away $100 million to people in stimulus money. Per capita, in the U.S., that's 29 cents per person. In Colombia, it's $2 per person because Colombia and the U.S. have different populations. If we say, we did 1 million coronavirus tests and South Korea did 500,000, might sound like we did more, but per capita, South Korea did way more because South Korea's population is much smaller than ours. We have 340 million people in the U.S. South Korea has about 50 million people. So check this out. Yesterday, reporter Yamiche Alcindor asked Trump about this, and Trump says, we're testing more than anyone. And Yamiche raises the issue of per capita, and Trump doesn't seem to get it. He wrongly states the population of Seoul, South Korea. He talks about how we have rural areas in the United States, and it only gets funnier. And by funnier, I mean more tragic because we laugh to avoid crying in these difficult times. Take a look at the first part of the video.
Mr. President, you said several times that the United States has ramped up testing, but the United States is still not testing per capita as many people as other countries like South Korea. Why is that, and when do you think that number will be on par with other countries?
Yeah, well, it's very much on par. Look, Look, well, per capita, we have areas of country that's very hard. I know South Korea better than anybody. It's a very tight. Do you know how many people are in Seoul? Do you know how big the city of Seoul is? 38 million people.
Okay, so that's like 10 seconds from Trump. And there are just so many things to look at there. Trump mentions, hey, but hold on a second. We have rural areas in the United States, and Seoul, South Korea is really dense. Per capita accounts for the population. That's the point of per capita. Trump is acting like the fact that we have rural areas means we are testing more per capita. No, we're talking about how much are we testing relative to the population, which includes rural areas and densely populated areas. Yamiche is at least trying to talk about per capita. Then Trump says he knows South Korea better than anyone, which is another one of those hyperbolic lies. But then again, immediately, he misstates the population of Seoul, saying Seoul has a population of 38 million. For a guy who knows the most about South Korea, it's weird not to know the population of Seoul. So it didn't sound right when Trump said 38 million. I looked it up. Seoul's population is only 9 million, almost 10 million. So I thought, well, maybe Trump was referring to the metro area, the Seoul metro area, but that's only 25 million. So I thought, well, maybe Trump meant all of South Korea has 38 million. But no, as I mentioned earlier, South Korea has about 51 million people. So then, and this is just too funny, if you Google Seoul, South Korea, this quick facts thing pops up and it says 38M, but that's the elevation of Seoul, 38 meters above sea level or 125 feet. Is it possible Trump is confusing population and elevation? Or is he just a moron who doesn't know anything and South Korea is he's not actually an expert in South Korea and he doesn't understand the concept of per capita? Maybe that's the most likely explanation. You be the judge. Here's the rest of the back and forth with journalist Yamiche Alcindor.
That's bigger than anything we have. 38 million people, all tightly wound together. We have vast farmlands. We have vast areas where they don't have much of a problem. In some cases, they have no problem whatsoever. We have done more tests. I didn't talk about per capita. We have done more tests by far than any country in the world, by far. Our testing is also better than any country in the world.
So again, Trump talking about how, hey, but we have rural areas. But again, per capita accounts for the total population and the number of tests adjusted to the size of that population. Imagine having a president. Imagine having a president. Guys, I think it's time to reset the simulation. The founder of MyPillow, a guy named Mike Lindell, a right-wing lunatic, a total Trump brown-nosing sycophant, he was invited to speak yesterday at the White House coronavirus press briefing, and he praised Trump as a gift from God to the United States. If you've not heard of MyPillow, maybe you don't watch Fox News at 2 a.m. MyPillow is a foam pillow sold in infomercials and often on Fox News itself. And MyPillow is going to retool some of their factories to manufacture masks for healthcare workers, which is great. That's fantastic. Mike Lindell was invited to speak during yesterday's press briefing, and he went completely off the rails, reading a statement off of a crinkled piece of paper that Trump is literally a gift from God given to the United States in November of 2016. Check this out.
Now I wrote something off the cuff, if I can read this. Okay. God gave us grace on November 8, 2016, to change the course we were on. God had been taken out of our schools and lives. A nation had turned its back on God. And I encourage you to use this time at home to get back in the Word, read our Bibles, and spend time with our families. Our president gave us so much hope where just a few short months ago, we had the best economy, the lowest unemployment, and wages going up. It was amazing. With our great president, vice president, and this administration, and all the great people in this country praying daily, we will get through this and get back to a place that's stronger and safer than ever.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Please come on up. I did not know he was going to do that, but he's a friend of mine, and I do appreciate it.
Why did God give us Trump in November of 2016 and give us the stock market and wages and all the stuff Mike's referring to, but then give us coronavirus with nearly 1 million confirmed worldwide cases, nearly 40,000 deaths, maybe more than 40,000 by the time this clip gets published. Why wouldn't God just not give us coronavirus to begin with, and we'd all be far better off? Oh, no, David, how dare you? God works in mysterious ways. He gave us Trump and coronavirus, and he gave us Trump to deal with coronavirus. Oh, yeah. Sorry. How dare I question that? It's not funny anymore, if it ever was. Imagine having an actual president who handles things like an adult, who in December and January takes action instead of too little too late in mid-March. A president who talks about the human toll at the press briefings and tries to connect with people and their struggles and the fact that this is a very scary situation. Instead, we have a president who disbanded the pandemic response team, did nothing until late February, early March, turns his press briefings into promotions for exciting new products that might appeal to coronavirus customers, as they've been referred to, while having corporate CEOs do promos for themselves while claiming Trump was a literal gift from God. We are in trouble. And if you watch the briefings, not just of governors here in the United States, but watch the briefings of world leaders in other countries, Justin Trudeau in Canada, Emmanuel Macron in France, Angela Merkel in Germany, you very quickly realize we don't have a leader here. We're depending on governors, the ones that are competent, to hopefully save us because we've got no leadership coming from the Oval Office. And the gift from God rant from the MyPillow sycophant, I was hoping I would wake up and that wouldn't really have happened yesterday, but it did, and this is where we are today. We'll continue discussing this on the David Pakman Show Instagram at David Pakman Show. While you're there, follow me as well at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Brian Greene to the program today, who's a professor of physics and mathematics and director of Columbia University's Center for Theoretical Physics, also known for his groundbreaking discoveries in superstring theory and author of many books, including, I believe most recently, it's Until the End of Time, right? That's your latest.
Yes, that's correct. Exactly.
So maybe to get into our conversation, when somebody maybe is trying to understand not something like superstring theory or the nuts and bolts, but more generally, what types of questions does your work seek to answer, to have a broader understanding of what you're doing? How would you explain that to them?
Well, certainly in the newest book that you just made reference to, Until the End of Time, the goal is to give the curious person a sense of how they fit within the cosmic whole. I mean, the journey that I take in that book is from the very beginning of time, walking through the sequence of steps that yield life and conscious beings, and on to the very far future. And within that cosmic unfolding, my goal is to give the person a sense of where they came from, the environment that they're in now, where it came from, and where things are going, with ultimately a new perspective on why things matter.
Does the day-to-day of sort of like thinking of superstring theory, for example, when you're working on something like superstring theory, does it feel like it's connected directly to answering those questions, or does it feel like it starts to get removed and sort of operate in a more theoretical space?
Well, we like to use the big questions as motivation. We deeply want to know the full story of creation, the full story of how the universe began. We'd love to understand the deep nature of space and time. These kinds of questions are why many of us, certainly for me it's the case, went into the field in the first place. But your question is a good one, because when you're in the midst of doing the research, it's like any other subject. The detail, the daily grind, if you will, can often be fairly disconnected from the big overarching goals. So I have students that come to me and they want to work in physics, and all they have in mind are the big, huge questions. And when I describe to them, hey, to make progress toward those questions, you got to do mathematical calculations, you got to do experiments, you got to write computer programs, you got to do simulations. For many of them, that's a bit of a shock, but that's the way you make progress in the day-to-day sense.
How would you sort of ballpark the progress that has been made, like over the last 10, 50, and 200 years on answering some of these questions? In other words, there's camps that say we're never really going to know the origins because we can't really go back in a way that would give us those answers. There's others who say maybe we will, but like aside from the end point that we may or may not get to, what's been the progress that has been made?
Well, it's been utterly stunning, right? If you go to the furthest extent of the timeline that you mentioned, go back 200 years to say the early 1800s, we were just beginning to gain an understanding of some of the most rudimentary forces at work in the universe, how electricity and magnetism work. The early experiments were just taking place, experiments on the nature of light. These were vital developments, but when you compare them with what we understand today, the insights that have come from special relativity, Einstein, general relativity, again, Einstein, quantum mechanics, and on through the developments in unification that have swept through the 20th century and into the 21st. I mean, right now, we can do mathematical calculations that tell us what the universe was like a fraction of a second after the beginning. And then we can use those mathematical insights to make predictions for what those conditions way back then should yield for our observations today. And many of those predictions are borne out to fantastic accuracy by powerful equipment that we launch into space that takes the temperature of the night sky, that looks deep into the heart of black holes. So it is stunning how far we've come in the last 200 years. What
do you think has been the effect of that on sort of the human psyche as we exist in the world? And the reason I ask, I mean, it's hard to separate that from technological advance, medical science changing so drastically, travel. Like it's difficult because those things have also changed so much. But what's your sense of how our understanding and day-to-day lives are different based on what we now know that we didn't 200 years ago?
Well, I don't think you can give a uniform blanket answer for all human minds. There are some of us who are deeply interested in these ideas, even if we're not doing research on the topic, and have allowed the insights of modern science to affect our outlook on the world and given us the laudable perspective that there are true qualities of reality that research, both experimental and theoretical equipment, together with, say, mathematical insights, can reveal. There are others, though, who enjoy the fruits of those undertakings, as you mentioned, the technology that has emerged from the deeper understanding, but have not taken in that mindset. And it's really unfortunate, especially in the situations that we find ourselves in today, when there are some who feel that reality ultimately is a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of opinion. I'm not trying to downgrade the value of opinions on certain issues, but in terms of true qualities of reality here on planet Earth and in the wider cosmos, there is such a thing as right and wrong. There is such a thing as fact and fiction. There is such a thing as expertise that can yield insights that can determine the correct course of action on vital issues. And not everyone has taken in this basic quality of scientific advancement over the past 200-300 years.
Right. Well, so, I mean, now we have the phrase alternative facts is an interesting one that has surfaced. And these ideas of, you know, if I don't like your conclusion, I can just kind of reject the premises that you use to build that up. Do you think that that's been more acutely weaponized recently in society?
It certainly has, especially when you've got leaders who have that very perspective, or at least leaders who leverage that perspective by using it as a tool, or as you describe, as a weapon to advance certain political perspectives. And that is deeply troubling. And as we're beginning to see, has the capacity to yield deep tragedy.
What's the solution in your mind to that? Because I've read some interesting pieces that say it's not as simple as we have to start teaching critical thinking and philosophy and epistemology earlier, that there's a bigger divide and a bigger picture issue than simply that.
I agree, although I would say that that is part of the solution. I can't help the optimistic side of my personality from saying, I just feel that if we could get kids at an early stage to really recognize the power of scientific insight, not abstractly, but, I've taught kids and I've seen them undergo that transition from confusion about something to mastery, even if it's a small element of math or physics. And that move from confusion to clarity can be life-changing because your way of thinking about the world and your recognition of your power to understand the world can radically change. But I agree that's not the full solution, because we find ourselves in an era when many people, and by many, I don't exactly know the number that I'm talking about, so don't hold me to sort of details of numbers here, but there is a segment of the population that makes decisions not based on thinking through policy, but rather who else is supporting that policy. It's the group think. It's whether or not you want to be in that group or the other group, as opposed to a rational evaluation of policy and perspective. And that kind of identity politics needs to shift, because that is not the appropriate, useful way to set policy.
Yeah, I'm curious what you would think about the motivations of, so let's just to give an example, the Tea Party in 2010, right? This was a movement that succeeded to the extent that it did because of individuals voting for people who were pushing policies that were not going to be good for them as individuals, but like Jonathan Haidt, for example, argues, they were policies that they identified as good for the group in which they were members, or, membership maybe is a bit of a too formal a term for it. Is that kind of individual versus group thinking a factor in what you're describing here?
It's huge. It's exactly what I'm describing. If you were to, and Jonathan probably did, because he is a great social scientist and goes out and gets the data. So I imagine that they've collected data. If you interview the very people who are supporting a given policy and ask them why they are supporting it, some will have thought it through, no doubt, but many will not have thought it through, because that's not the way that the decision is made. Rather, the decision is made in the manner that you describe. Do you want to be identified as being part of that group of people who, for whatever reason, you feel more of a kinship with? Or do you want to break ranks with the group that you feel that kinship with in order to follow a policy that is not widely accepted by the initial group? And unfortunately, that kind of perspective and that kind of decision making is prevalent, and it's not the kind of decision making that ultimately is good for the world.
So to zoom out from this a tiny bit, I have this idea that maybe is very naive, and I'm curious what you think about it, which is, if we were to make contact with alien intelligence and find out it's real, if we were to figure out some of the big answers that people in your field are looking for about our place in the universe, et cetera, I have this idea that issues like gay marriage and debt and deficit and stuff like this would evaporate, because everybody would immediately have this awakening as a result of this new information that we have. Is that incredibly naive? Would we just kind of adjust and keep having the same disagreements we're having?
Well, I think the answer depends a lot on the details, right? It's certainly the case that having a common enemy is a powerful force of unification, fortunately and unfortunately at the same time. When we can identify a common enemy, it allows us to bind together into an even larger group if that will aid in our survival. And look, many of our predilections emerged from evolutionary pressures across, tens of thousands of generations. And the ability to come together into socialized groups has been an important means by which we have gotten to our place of dominance in the world. So it's not surprising that we have this sort of inbuilt reaction to certain kinds of pressure, certain kinds of challenges, and one such challenge is a common enemy. But, I like to think that if we encounter the aliens, maybe it won't be an enemy. Maybe it'd be a very friendly relationship. And if that were the case, maybe they would reveal deep truths that somehow the world would listen to. But I have a feeling that it's maybe over a long stretch of time that might be possible. But the notion that I think you are articulating, that all of a sudden we sort of lift ourselves up from thinking about all of the issues here, and all of this now is sort of secondary to this larger kind of conversation we're having with the aliens, I suspect that would not happen, at least not on the kinds of instantaneous timescales that you have in mind.
Well, part of what makes me doubt it would happen at all is that humans seem to have this incredible ability to just adjust to what reality becomes, and it becomes the new baseline, and things sort of return to some kind of baseline in some way.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the case. I was on an airplane, at JFK on the tarmac on September 11th, 2001, and I saw the plane hit the tower. From my seat in the plane, I had a clear shot right from Queens into Manhattan, and so there was a sense at that moment that the world would completely change, that nobody would live their lives the way that they once did. And that was true for a while, and there certainly have been changes that occurred by virtue of 9/11 without a doubt. But I think many people reverted at least pretty close to the lives that they led if they weren't directly part of the tragedy, or if they didn't have a loved one who was directly part of the tragedy. We do have this, you can call it resilience, this ability to sort of revert back to the way that we once were. And so I kind of agree with you that is the default development that we certainly have seen happen over and over again, that we find a way of sort of acclimating to the new environment and taking our old lives and fitting it in to the new jigsaw puzzle as best as we can, and then going forward from there.
Let's pause our conversation with Professor of Physics and Mathematics Brian Greene there. The full conversation will be on the David Pakman Show YouTube channel at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have good news for you today in that a bad person lost their job, but it's still all wrapped in terrible news, which is that Fox News is still combining with the Trump administration to continue spreading violent disinformation about the virus. I'm talking now about former Fox News host Trish Regan, really a vile person. Trish Regan was until recently a Fox Business Channel host. She went on one of the most unhinged Trump-defending, coronavirus-minimizing rants that we've ever seen just a couple of weeks ago, and Fox has said bye-bye to her, although we don't yet know exactly why. Check out the first part of this bizarre rant. Everything about it is wacky and deranged. This was, again, a couple of weeks ago when we knew this was a crisis. Take a look.
We've reached a tipping point. The chorus of hate being leveled at the president is nearing a crescendo as Democrats blame him and only him for a virus that originated halfway around the world. This is yet another attempt to impeach the president. And sadly, it seems they care very little for any of the destruction they are leaving in their wake. Losses in the stock market. All this, unfortunately, just part of the political casualties for them. You know, this is a time to be united, not to be pointing fingers, not to be encouraging hate. And yet, what do we see? We see the absolute opposite from the left tonight. Good evening, everyone. I am Trish Regan. The hate is boiling over. Many in the liberal media using, and I mean using, coronavirus in an attempt to demonize and destroy the president.
This monologue, which should really be Exhibit A in media literacy classes for distinguishing between news and opinion, identifying bias, identifying unstable people, maybe in a psychology class. It went on for 5 minutes, and really it peaked at the end when Trish Regan couldn't even keep her nonsense straight off of the teleprompter, sort of got lost in her own teleprompter while continuing to, in a completely unhinged, fact-free way, defend Donald Trump and minimize the virus. Here's the wrap-up to her lunatic soliloquy.
For the media to spin a narrative that this sell-off and this virus are all a result of President Trump, it's just wrong. But unfortunately, I guess they needed someone to blame. They were looking for someone to blame. They want to blame him for literally anything they can. And they have no real interest, shall we say, in finding who's to blame, who is the root cause of all this. From what we can tell, this all originated out of China. You know, when Donald Trump is their political target, that's all they need. And that's tonight's intel.
So the good news is bye-bye Trish Regan. The bad news is Fox is still a disaster. It's also not clear that this rant is why she was fired. It may be, it may not be. Fox has only been saying, you know, we thank Trish and we wish her continued success. So we don't even really know the full reality of it. One idea is that Trish Regan may sort of be like the sacrificial lamb for all of Fox News, because you've got the Fox and Friends clowns in the morning talking about flying around and going to restaurants and wanting to get their nails done. You have Sean Hannity talking about how vaping might protect you from coronavirus and suggesting unproven prophylactic treatments for the virus. According to reporter Gabriel Sherman, Fox News is actually worried about possible legal liability for their coronavirus downplaying. So maybe they're tossing Trish Regan out of there to say, hey, listen, we took it seriously. We pulled her off the air. We cut ties with her. We did the right thing while allowing everybody else to continue spouting the nonsense. So that's Trish Regan. We do have one more Fox News related story today, which is about that lunatic right-wing Judge Jeanine Pirro, who appeared visibly drunk during her weekend program, also presumably being produced from her home at this point. So let's talk about that one next. So there's this wacky former judge. She's a pro-Trump judge named Jeanine Pirro. She does a weekend show on Fox News. I think it might just be a once a week show, but maybe it's like a Friday, a Saturday and Sunday show. But I believe it's just once a week. She appeared extremely impaired and disheveled during her program over the weekend. And the speculation that's running rampant is that she seemed to be very, very drunk. First, her show was delayed for technical difficulties. Now, presumably that's something related to something about her socially distanced studio. It was really a technical issue. But when the show started, Judge Jeanine was slurring her words. She looked visibly disheveled. At one point, she appeared to be nodding off while her guest was speaking. And the idea now is it possible that Judge Jeanine was actually drunk? Now, whether or not her drunkenness explains the technical delay of the show, we just have no idea. Let's go to the first clip. She seems confused about what the next segment is. And as you can hear right before, this is so crazy, right before the intro graphic cuts to her, you actually hear her yell to someone off camera somewhere, "I can't," before she starts confusedly reading the teleprompter. Take a look at this.
I can't. All right, joining us tonight.
Every time that they came back from a commercial break, she seemed more impaired. Check this out. And here is a very labored teleprompter reading from Judge Jeanine.
Welcome back to Justice. Just the other day, the president talked or was hoping about the possibility of reopening everything on Easter Sunday, and in a way where we could kind of come out of this quarantine, as loose as it may be, that we're involved in. And Lisa Booth, the Fox News contributor, is here to talk with us tonight about whether or not that's even a possibility. How are you, Lisa?
So alcohol is the main thing that's being mentioned. Quaaludes was the other thing being thrown around, sort of a throwback to the Wolf of Wall Street era. At another point, she appears to be sort of nodding off while her guest talks, her head kind of leaning more and more to her left until she seems to kind of be startled back into a higher level of coherence. So it's very weird. And anyway, who knows what this exactly is, but it keeps happening. Remember that Rudy Giuliani's evening appearances on Fox News and other TV stations were limited. They tried to get Rudy on during the day because his evening drinking at dinner was becoming a problem. And he would then go on TV after having had a few too many, along with one of those big cigars that he likes. Last week, maybe it was the week before, it's all blending together, we saw Trump economic advisor Larry Kudlow, who is known to have previously had pretty severe drinking problems. He seemed impaired on television, and now Judge Jeanine Pirro. Things are all just crazy in the era of coronavirus. And again, I want to be really clear. Alcoholism is nothing to laugh at. And in fact, I think we need to be taking extra care during this time to mention a lot of people are under stress, anxiety, depression, cabin fever, erratic behavior, because these are not normal times. I've never experienced anything like this in my lifetime. Most people alive today have never experienced a sort of shut down quarantine isolation situation like this at the global scale in any of their lifetimes. And I understand turning to whatever it is, right? We're hearing about people turning to benzos. We're hearing about people turning to alcohol, et cetera. But whatever it is that's going on at Fox News with the drinking and the impairedness and right-wingers who seem to be impaired on TV, it's getting a little bit weird, and it's more than just concerning. Let me know what you make of the Jeanine Pirro thing. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a very specific question about IQ and Donald Trump.
Hi, David. I'm a huge fan of your show. I watch it almost every day. I'm 24. I work in staffing and recruiting in Houston.
Right.
I'm just curious, if you had to guess, what would you say Trump's overall IQ is? Because if I had to guess, I would say it's at about 90, which maybe for the average person is not super low. But of course, as president, that is entirely too low. And you want to know something? I just don't feel he has the IQ to do the job. So what are your thoughts? What would you say his overall IQ is?
Listen, I don't really want to speculate on Trump's IQ because the entire IQ thing has been weaponized, as many of you know, with race IQ stuff, with overblowing the importance of IQ and the connection of IQ to different measures of success. Like, what I can tell you is Donald Trump clearly doesn't have the temperament, nor the knowledge, nor the attention span, nor the personality to be a good president. He doesn't strike me as a good person. He doesn't seem able to actually feel empathy. He does not seem to be able to engage in the sort of deep learning and reading that is required that President Obama was able to engage in to be a good president. And that's where I would focus my energy. I have no idea what Trump's IQ is. There are lots of people with a high IQ that are bad people, and therefore you still don't want them as president. So I understand what you're saying. I think that I would approach it sort of a different way, which is Trump has failed us as president regardless of his IQ. He could have a 160 IQ. Who knows? I don't care. He's a bad president, and that's why he needs to be removed in November. Okay, next Thursday, April 9th, we are going to try to have a coordinated membership explosion, all right? There's going to be an email going out to everybody on our mailing list at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on Thursday, April 9th, with a huge membership discount, the biggest discount of the year. Why are we doing this on April 9th? Well, a couple things are going on. Number one, a lot of people are canceling memberships because of coronavirus, and we don't want to reduce hours. We don't want to do layoffs. We want to just be able to keep things going. And so we want to kind of try to recover some of those lost memberships. We've also had some advertisers that have had to stop or cancel campaigns with us because they aren't selling product. So they're not going to do advertising right now. And lastly, April is the anniversary of Adpocalypse 2017. So a lot of the people who signed up in 2017, no doubt, are going to have credit cards that have expired and membership payments that are going to fail. So April could be very ugly, which is why on Thursday, April 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern, an email will go out with a huge membership special. I invite you to participate. Sign up for our mailing list. You do it at davidpakman.com, top right of the website. You put in your email address. That's it. Okay, don't email me about this. Sign up at davidpakman.com, and you'll be notified about this special on Thursday, April 9th. Join me on the bonus show today. We have updates from the producer Pat Ford fiasco involving a fire, firefighters, water, a collapsed ceiling. It's a nutty story. I will give you the updates on today's bonus show, and we have much more to discuss as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.